I hail from what's now known as the Powder River region. My father, Cherry, raised me. Though I'm of Blackfoot and Cheyenne descent, I've spent my life among the Arapahoes. As a young boy, I favored my left hand over my right, a peculiarity among Indians, earning me the name Left Hand, a moniker I've carried since. I fought in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, where General Custer met his end. I was accompanied by 4 other Arapahoes. Though it's been ages since, the memory remains vivid, as clear as if it happened just yesterday. The Arapahoes, including myself and 4 other young men, Yellow Eagle, Yellow Fly, Waterman, and a southern Arapaho nicknamed Green Grass, were encamped at Fort Robinson. We departed from the camp on a war party expedition against the Shoshones. Waterman, also known as Well-Knowing One or Sage, identified the 5th Arapaho in our group. Our journey led us northward toward the land of the Crows. Along the way, we encountered a small group of Sioux who informed us that their village was situated near the Little Bighorn. They invited us to join them for a significant Sundance event, urging us to accompany them. They suspected us of being scouts for the white soldiers and kept a close eye on us. We accompanied them to their camp in the valley of the Little Bighorn. As we neared the village, several Sioux approached us. They disarmed us and threatened to kill us, claiming we were working for the white soldiers. The following morning, Two Moon, chief of the Cheyennes, intervened with the Sioux chiefs, informing them that we were Arapahoes and insisting they return our weapons and release us, which they did. However, they continued to closely monitor us to prevent our escape. On the second day in the Sioux camp, they relocated further down the river, and it was the following day that the battle occurred. The initial attack by Major Reno's men occurred at the southern end of the village around 9 a.m., indicated by the sun's position. The soldiers discharged a few rounds, but when we charged toward them, they panicked and retreated across the river. Many of them lost their horses and had to swim to safety. They ascended a high ridge and erected a barricade, resulting in numerous soldier casualties as the Sioux surrounded them. Around noon, when the sun was directly overhead, we heard gunfire from the lower part of the village, indicating the arrival of more soldiers. I traversed the village and crossed the river with a sizable group of Sioux and Cheyennes. During the initial skirmish, we Arapahoes had become separated. The soldiers were positioned on the ridge, surrounded by Indians. Gunfire echoed everywhere, mingled with the shouts of the Indians, creating a frenzy of excitement. Spotting a wounded Indian on foot, I mistook him for one of the Crow or Arikara scouts allied with the soldiers. Riding towards him with my lance, I struck him in the chest with its arrow-like tip, causing him to collapse over a heap of fallen soldiers. It was later revealed he was a Sioux, and his comrade sought revenge on me for his death. One Sioux attempted to seize my horse, but I refused to surrender it. Amidst the chaos, with hills teeming with yelling and shooting Indians, I ascended the ridge where a soldier, lying on the ground, handed me his gun. I accepted the weapon but chose not to kill him. However, some Sioux behind me fatally shot him. Returning to the fallen soldier, I claimed his belt, which was stocked with numerous cartridges. I caught sight of Custer once during the battle. He was clad in buckskin, standing upright near the fight's conclusion, pistols in hand, firing at the Indians. After that, I didn't see him until it was all over. As I roamed the battlefield, I spotted him lying lifeless among the fallen. Many soldiers had perished, although a few still stirred slightly. By the time the sun had shifted to around 3 p.m., every white man had fallen. The Sioux scalped many of them, and later the women crossed the river to strip the soldiers of their clothing. I'm unsure of what they did with the deceased soldiers as I returned to camp and rejoined my fellow Arapahoes. Some of the Indians went back to confront the soldiers barricaded on the ridge at the camp's southern end, but I chose not to join them. The following morning, the Sioux packed up their camp and headed towards the mountains. We heard rumors of soldiers approaching up the river, which frightened the Indians. That night, once they had settled into camp and darkness had fallen, the 4 of us Arapahoes stealthily made our way to the pony herd. Each of us mounted a pony and quietly slipped away. We rode as swiftly as possible back to Fort Robinson, where the rest of the Arapahoes were stationed. During the battle, I achieved 13 coups. I was garbed in a shirt and breechclout, and my talisman was a piece of buffalo hide crafted into a cross with 2 feathers, which I wore in my hair. Custer made a foolish decision to take on the Sioux at that moment. His forces were greatly outnumbered, with the Sioux and Cheyenne swarming like the grass on a hillside. I can't say exactly how many there were, but I've never seen so many Indians gathered in one place. Only a handful of Sioux and Cheyenne were killed, and they were laid to rest on the western bank of the river where the camp was located. None of Custer's men survived. All were slain in the battle. In my youth, there were countless Indians around. Back then, white men would trade guns for buffalo robes, but things have shifted dramatically since. Many moons ago, a revered medicine man promised that if we performed a specific dance for an extended period, the buffalo would return and the Indians would regain their freedom and joy. However, that prophecy didn't come true. Nowadays, the Indian feels like a captive on his reservation. The buffalo and antelope have vanished, leaving us old men to sit by the fire, singing our war songs and reminiscing about the past. The Indians had set up camp on the western bank of the Bighorn River in a flat valley. We noticed a cloud of dust but weren't sure what it signified. Some of the Indians speculated it might be the soldiers approaching. Our chief spotted a flag flying on a pole atop a hill. Suddenly, the soldiers formed a long line and began firing into our teepees, where our women and children were. It caught us completely off guard. The women quickly grabbed their children, scooped up their babies, and fled in all directions. This skirmish occurred in the upper part of the valley, where most of the Indians had set up camp. It was some of Reno's soldiers who pursued us there. The attack took place around midday, just before lunchtime. As we retaliated, the soldiers attempted to flee into the forest and cross the water back to where they had left their wagons. The riverbank was approximately this high, pointing to 12 feet, steep, and they dismounted from their horses, trying to scramble out of the water on hands and knees. However, we managed to kill nearly all of them as they fled through the woods and in the water. Those who made it across the river and up the hill dug holes and took cover in them. The soldiers stationed on the hill with the pack horses opened fire on us. At that moment, all the Indians had armed themselves with horses, guns, bows and arrows, and war clubs, and they launched a charge against the soldiers positioned to the east and north atop the hill. Custer was further north from these soldiers at that time, planning to strike the lower end of the village. We pursued almost all of those who escaped us down the hill, along the ridge where another group of soldiers was attempting to make a stand. Crazy Horse and I broke away from the crowd and rode down along the river. We reached a ravine and followed it up to a spot behind the soldiers who were holding their ground on the hill. Crazy Horse handed me his horse to hold along with mine. Then, he crept up the ravine until he could see the soldiers. He fired at them as quickly as he could load his gun. They tumbled off their horses at a rapid pace. Here, the chief swayed rapidly back and forth to illustrate how quickly they fell. When they realized they were being picked off so swiftly, the remaining soldiers scattered and raced as fast as their horses could carry them to join some other soldiers further along the ridge towards Custer. There, they attempted to make another stand and exchange gunfire, but we charged them along the ridge toward Custer. They attempted another stand, the third, and held their ground for a few minutes before moving along the ridge and joining Custer's men. More Indians joined us after we gathered most of the men at the ravine. Together, we relentlessly pursued the soldiers until they reached Custer's position. By then, only a few of them remained. Meanwhile, all the Indians in the village had armed themselves and mounted their horses, closely observing Custer's movements. As Custer approached the lower end of the camp, he attempted to descend a gulch, but the Indians had surrounded him. Despite their efforts to fight back, dismounting and making a stand, it was futile. Their horses bolted down the ravine and straight into the village, where the women swiftly captured them. Among them was a sorrel horse with white stockings. Much later, some of our relatives recounted seeing Custer on such a horse when he was en route to the Bighorn. Once we had them surrounded, the battle was over in just an hour. The dust was so thick that visibility was limited, but the Indians rode around, shouting war cries and firing at the soldiers until they were all dead. One soldier attempted to flee to the east, but Crazy Horse spotted him and pursued him on horseback. He caught up to him about half a mile away from where the others lay dead. As the smoke cleared, we could see a little better. We dismounted and looted the soldiers, taking their rings, money, watches, and some clothes, along with all their guns and pistols. We collected a total of 700 guns and pistols. Then we returned to gather the women and children who had not been killed or injured.